At my sister Sophia's wedding, her mother-in-law pointed and proclaimed, "Can you please stand by the trash? We've run out of seats." I surveyed the room and discovered that even her cat had a spot. So I took my gift, smiled, and declared appropriately, since that's where this marriage belongs. She came running as I continued. As a 32-year-old man, I never thought I'd be the one causing a scene at my sister's wedding, but some insults run too deep to ignore. The morning started perfectly. Sophia had been planning this day for 2 years, and despite our complicated family history, I was genuinely happy for her. I had found someone, Rodrigo, who seemed to treat her well, although I had reservations about his family due to the limited interaction we'd had during the engagement. I arrived early at the venue, wearing my best suit and carrying an expensive Tlaquepaque crystal vase I'd been saving for months. The wedding was held at a luxurious event venue, Hacienda San Angel, the kind of place where everything glittered and the staff moved like shadows. Sophia had always dreamed of an elegant wedding, and Rodrigo's family had the means to make it happen. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I watched Sophia walk down the aisle radiant in her gown and felt that familiar surge of protection I'd experienced since we were children. Our parents died when she was 16 and I was 24, leaving me to help raise her through her final years of high school. We'd been through it all together. After the ceremony, guests began filing into the reception hall. I followed the crowd, still clutching my gift, searching for the appropriate table to place it on and finding my assigned seat. The room was decorated with white roses and gold details. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm light over round tables covered with ivory linen tablecloths. That's when I ran into her. Sophia's new mother-in-law, Dona Elvira, approached me near the entrance to the reception area. She was a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary of 25,000 pesos. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, her jewelry tasteful but expensive, and her expression bore that particular brand of disdain I'd seen before in people who believed their bank account determined their value as human beings. She looked me up and down with barely concealed disgust, her eyes lingering on my store-brand suit and department store shoes. I'd done the best I could with what I had, but apparently it wasn't enough for her standards. Without any greeting or acknowledgement that I was the bride's brother, she pointed to a corner near the kitchen doors where Catherine's staff had set up a waste disposal station. The area was clearly not intended for guests, with its utilitarian layout and proximity to the service entrance. She informed me I could stay by the trash can because they'd run out of seats. Her tone was casual, almost bored, as if she were directing a waiter to clean up a spill instead of speaking to a relative of the bride. I stood there for a moment, processing what she had just said. Behind her, I could see the reception hall filling with guests, all of whom seemed to be finding their assigned places at beautifully set tables. The wedding had about 150 attendees, and I couldn't believe that in a venue of this size with so much planning, they had somehow forgotten to include the bride's only living relative. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take a stroll around the room to see how serious this seating shortage really was. What I discovered made my blood boil. At table after table, I saw cutlery for people who hadn't even bothered to show up, empty chairs with name cards for distant relatives and family friends who had apparently sent their apologies after the final head count. But what really drove me crazy was what I saw at the head table. There, next to the bride and groom, was a small cushioned chair with a tiny place setting. A miniature bow had been tied to the back of the chair, along with a small name tag bearing the name of Sophia's new in-law's Persian cat, a certain Misafew. The cat wasn't even present at the reception, but had been assigned a seat at the most prestigious table in the room. I returned to where Dona Elvira was presiding over several other guests, regaling them with stories about the wedding planning process and how everything had to be absolutely perfect for her son's special day. She was emphasizing how much money they had spent, how exclusive the venue was, and how carefully they had curated the guest list to include only the most important people in their lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was a woman who had given a chair to a cat that wasn't even present while directing the bride's only brother to stay by the trash. I approached her again, and this time my voice carried a different tone. I thanked her for clarifying the seating situation and mentioned that I had looked around the room to better understand the space limitations she had mentioned. I pointed out that I'd seen quite a few empty seats, including what appeared to be a special spot for their family pet. Her response was everything I'd hoped for. She became defensive, explaining that those seats were reserved for very important people who might still arrive and that the cat spot was a lovely family tradition that I obviously wouldn't understand. She suggested that perhaps I wasn't familiar with how elegant weddings were conducted, given my background. That last comment was the breaking point. I looked at the expensive gift in my hands, then back at her smug expression. It had taken me 3 months to save up for the crystal vase that cost almost 6,000 pesos, representing hours of extra time spent outside for dinners that I skipped. I had chosen it because Sophia had always loved beautiful things, and I wanted to give her something that would remind her of this day for years to come. But looking around at this circus of artificial importance and manufactured exclusivity, I realized my gift would probably end up forgotten in a closet, overshadowed by the mountain of expensive gifts from her new family's wealthy circle. I raised my voice enough to get the attention of the nearby guests and told him he was absolutely right about the seating arrangement. Staying by the trash can was, in fact, appropriate as it seemed to be exactly where this couple belonged. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. The conversations around us stopped mid-sentence. The guests turned to look, unsure if they had heard correctly. Dona Elvira's face changed color several times, from white to red to purple, like a traffic light stuck in malfunction mode. It wasn't over. I went on to observe that any family that treated their new daughter-in-law's only brother with such disrespect on her wedding day was showing their true colors. I pointed out that it was interesting how they'd found room for an absent cat at the head table, but couldn't manage to make room for the person who had helped raise the bride after her parents died. Dona Elvira began to babble, trying to interrupt me, but I found my rhythm and didn't stop. I mentioned that my sister deserved better than to marry into a family that measured people's worth by their bank statements and treated kindness as a luxury they couldn't afford. I suggested that if this was how they handled family relationships, I could only imagine what kind of support system they would provide during the inevitable challenges every marriage faces. By this point, a significant portion of the reception had turned to watch our exchange. I could see Sophia across the room, still in her wedding dress, looking confused and worried at the commotion. Her new husband, Rodrigo, stood beside her with an unreadable expression. Dona Elvira finally found her voice and began demanding that I leave immediately. She called security, even though the place didn't actually have any security personnel. She threatened to have me arrested, even though I hadn't touched anyone or damaged any property. Her voice grew louder with each threat, drawing even more attention to our corner of the room. I remained calm throughout her tirade, which seemed to infuriate her even more. When she finally paused for breath, I told her she was absolutely right again. This wasn't the place for someone like me, someone who truly cared about my sister as a person, rather than as an accessory to enhance her social status. I walked over to the gift table and placed my crystal vase among the other presents. As I set it down, I announced to anyone within earshot that it belonged to the bride's brother, the one who wasn't important enough for a seat, but apparently significant enough to inspire a public meltdown from the groom's mother. The walk to the exit felt like it lasted an eternity, with each step taking me past staring faces and whispered conversations. Some guests seemed sympathetic, others seemed scandalized, and a few seemed genuinely entertained by the drama they had just witnessed. Just as I reached the front door, I heard Sophia call my name. She hurried across the room as fast as her dress would allow, her face flushed and her eyes wide with a mixture of embarrassment and something that looked like understanding. She caught up with me just outside the reception hall and asked what had happened. I could see the internal struggle reflected in her features. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but her new mother-in-law had just publicly humiliated her only relative. I calmly explained the situation, from the initial directive to stay by the trash to my discovery of the seat reserved for the cat. I told her I understood it was her wedding day and I didn't want to cause her pain, but I couldn't pretend that being treated like garbage was acceptable. Sophia's expression changed from confusion to anger as the full picture became clear. She asked me to wait while she went back inside to address the situation. I told her not to worry, that I'd already said what I needed to say, and that I just wanted her to be happy, but she was determined to fix things. She returned to the reception hall with a determination I recognized from our childhood, the same energy she'd shown when defending me against neighborhood bullies or standing up to teachers who treated her unfairly. I waited outside for about 10 minutes before she returned, this time accompanied by her new husband. Her face was tense with stress, and I could tell that whatever conversation had just taken place inside hadn't gone well. My sister informed me that she had made it very clear to her mother-in-law that I was family, and that family isn't treated like hired help at weddings. She had also mentioned that if there wasn't room for her brother at the reception, then maybe there wasn't room for her either. Rodrigo looked uncomfortable, but nodded in agreement. He apologized for his mother's behavior and explained that she sometimes got carried away by social protocols and forgot basic human decency. He assured me it wouldn't happen again and asked if I would consider coming back. I appreciated the gesture, but the damage had been done. I told them I'd already made my statement and that continuing the evening would only create more tension for everyone involved. I suggested they return to their guests and try to salvage what remained of their celebration. Sophia hugged me tightly and whispered that she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She said she'd always known her new in-laws were pretentious, but she hadn't realized how cruel they could be to people they considered beneath them. As I drove home, I reflected on the evening's events. I'd likely burned several bridges and created lasting family drama that would follow my sister for years. But I'd also drawn a line in the sand about how I was willing to be treated. And sometimes that's more important than keeping the peace. First update. 3 days after the wedding, Sophia called me. She sounded exhausted, like someone who's been fighting battles on multiple fronts and is running out of energy for the war. She told me that the aftermath of the reception had been significant. Several guests had approached her throughout the evening. Some expressed support for my position, while others criticized what they considered inappropriate behavior at a wedding. Dona Elvira spent the rest of the evening playing the victim, telling anyone who would listen how I had attacked her without provocation and ruined her son's perfect day. More worrying was the impact on my sister's new marriage. Her husband was caught between defending his wife's family and managing his mother's wounded pride. The mother-in-law demanded an apology from me and threatened to cut off contact with the couple if she didn't get one. Sophia asked me if I would consider writing a letter of apology, not because she thought I was wrong, but because she was trying to preserve her relationship with her new in-laws. She explained that married life was complicated enough without having to navigate a family dispute on every holiday and special occasion. I understood her position, but I couldn't bring myself to apologize for refusing to accept disrespectful treatment. I told her I would think about it, but any apology would have to acknowledge that the original offense stemmed from being directed to stand by the garbage while a cat got a seat at the head table. Second update, a week later, I received an unexpected phone call from my sister's father-in-law, Don Ricardo. He had remained mostly silent during the drama of the wedding reception, and I wasn't sure what to expect from our conversation. He surprised me by apologizing for his wife's behavior. She explained that she had grown up in extreme poverty and had developed an obsession with social status as an adult, often taking things too far in her efforts to maintain what she perceived as a proper hierarchy. She didn't excuse her actions, but wanted me to understand that her cruelty stemmed from insecurity, not genuine malice. He also revealed something that put the whole situation into new perspective. Apparently, his wife had specifically instructed the wedding planner to minimize my presence at the reception because she was worried that my working-class background would reflect negatively on her family in front of her wealthy friends. The seating arrangement wasn't an oversight, it was deliberate. This information made me even more certain that I had made the right decision in reporting his behavior. What I had initially assumed was inconsiderate rudeness was actually a calculated humiliation designed to put me in my place. Don Ricardo asked me if there was anything he could do to repair the relationship between our families. I told him I appreciated his call and his honesty, but that the way forward required his wife to acknowledge what she had done wrong and change her behavior, not just smooth things over with explanations about her past. Third update. 2 months after the wedding, Sophia visited me at my apartment. She looked different, more mature somehow, but also sadder than I'd seen her since our parents died. She told me that married life had been challenging in ways she hadn't expected. Her mother-in-law continued to make passive-aggressive comments about me and my absence from family gatherings. More troubling was her husband's response to the ongoing tension. Instead of setting boundaries with his mother, he had begun to suggest that perhaps it would be easier if Sophia simply accepted that our families weren't a good fit and focused on building relationships within her social circle. My sister was beginning to realize that the incident at the wedding reception had been a foretaste of bigger problems within her new family. They valued conformity and social status over authenticity and genuine relationships. She was expected to gradually distance herself from her past, including me, in order to fully integrate into their world. She apologized for asking me to consider writing an apology letter. I now understood that the problem wasn't my response to the disrespect, but the disrespect itself and the family dynamics that made such treatment seem acceptable. I assured him he didn't need to apologize for trying to keep the peace in his marriage. I told him I would always be his brother, no matter how his in-laws felt about me, and that he could call me anytime he needed support or just wanted to remember where he came from. As he walked away, he turned around and said something that stuck with me. You know the saddest part? That track-opaque glass vase you brought is the only wedding gift I have on display in our house. Everything else feels like an obligation, but yours feels like love. Looking back on that night at Hacienda San Angel, I don't regret standing up for myself. Sometimes dignity is more important than diplomatic harmony, and sometimes trash is exactly where certain attitudes belong. My sister learned something important about her new family that night, even if it took her a while to fully process the implications. The wedding reception lasted a few hours, but the marriages we make, whether with romantic partners or with our principals, last much longer. I chose to stay married to my self-worth, and time has proven it was the right choice. Thanks for watching this video. If you have any thoughts, opinions, or comments, please feel free to leave them below. We'd love to hear from you. If you found the content useful or interesting, give us a thumbs up to support us, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss our next videos. Thank you so much for joining us for Living Stories. If you found the content useful or interesting, give us a thumbs up to support us, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss our next videos. Thank you so much for joining us for Living Stories. The story of M began in the most ordinary of settings, but what unfolded was anything but typical. M was the quiet type, the one who never sought the spotlight, yet something in her hidden strength, an untold story, always made her stand out. Her journey was not a grand adventure filled with dramatic twists, but a series of small, seemingly insignificant moments that wove together into a profound narrative of resilience and self-discovery. Growing up in a small, tightly knit community, M was often overlooked, her dreams dismissed as too big for someone from her background. But she carried them anyway, silently, like a treasure tucked away in the pocket of her heart. It wasn't until a particular Christmas Eve, when her family had banished her to the freezing garage, that the truth began to surface. Alone in the cold, M found solace in a box she had kept hidden for years. It wasn't just a collection of old memories, it was her secret, the one thing that could change everything. When her family discovered the truth, when they realized she secretly owned something far more valuable than they had ever imagined, they saw her for the first time not as the quiet, overlooked one, but as someone who had quietly built her own path. That Christmas Eve, the cold in the garage was nothing compared to the warmth that finally filled her heart. The story of M wasn't just a story about overcoming obstacles, it was about finding power in the quiet and letting that power speak for itself.